My name is Claire, and I'm 33 years old. I live alone in a quiet two-bedroom rental just outside of Portland. It's not fancy, but it's mine. I pay the bills. I decide who walks through the door. Or at least, I used to. That morning, I was folding laundry, the mundane kind of peace I used to mistake for boredom. My phone was off. I had taken the day to reset, something I rarely gave myself permission to do. But peace isn't a permanent state, at least not in my family. It's a brief, fragile window before the next obligation breaks through. The doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a package, but when I opened the door, the air shifted. There she stood, my sister-in-law, 7 months pregnant, her belly round and heavy under a stretched hoodie. One suitcase beside her, one hand clutching her phone like a lifeline. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Behind her, my brother's car rolled slowly down the driveway. He didn't wave. He didn't even look back. He just drove off, as if he'd dropped off a package at a stranger's house. For several seconds, I didn't move. I just stared, not at her, but at the disappearing tail lights. It felt like watching someone close the door to a cell, only I was on the inside and hadn't realized it yet. I blinked, but the scene didn't change. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed down, her posture one of practiced shame, and something inside me twisted. Not pity exactly, but that dangerous blend of guilt and inherited responsibility. The kind women in my family were trained to carry without question. My phone lit up again and again on the counter. The texts were coming fast. My mother's name, my brother's, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't need to read them to know the tone. They would say things like, "Be a good person," or "She needs you right now." But beneath all that, the real message was simpler. It's not about what you want. Before I go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you're still watching this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. I want to know if I'm not alone. Because in that moment, I felt completely abandoned. Not just by my brother, but by everyone who ever told me I was the strong one. The first few hours were a blur. She came in, quietly, sat on the edge of my couch. I brought her a glass of water like I was hosting a polite guest. But there was no plan, no conversation, just a massive, unspoken reality taking up space in my home and in my mind. I kept replaying every memory that had led to this moment. Every time I'd picked up after my brother's failures. Every moment my parents had praised him for doing the bare minimum while I bent myself backward for crumbs of acknowledgement. This wasn't new. This was a pattern, and I had let it become normal. By evening, she was in my spare room, my workspace, my sanctuary, and I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the sink full of dishes I hadn't used. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loaded. Every corner of the house now felt different, occupied, monitored, uninvited. I started receiving voice messages from my mother. Her voice was filled with urgency, but not concern for me, only for appearances. She reminded me that my sister-in-law was vulnerable, that the baby could come early, that family sticks together. Her words were wrapped in emotional blackmail dressed as wisdom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my own bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling more like a tenant in my own life than a homeowner. The walls felt tighter, my breathing shallower. And the worst part? I knew this wasn't a temporary situation. No one said it out loud, but the expectation was clear. This is where she lives now. This is what you do now. This is who you are now. But I hadn't agreed to any of it. And that's the part that burned the most. Not that they needed help, not that she was pregnant and scared and left on my doorstep, but that everyone in my life assumed I would take it, that I would bend, sacrifice, surrender, because I always had. What no one realized was that something had shifted. Maybe not loudly, maybe not in a way they could see, but in me, a quiet resolve had started to form. It wasn't anger, not yet, but it was something close. It was the awareness that I had a choice, whether or not they liked it. But at the time, I didn't speak up. I didn't push back. I simply existed in the shadow of their decision, walking through a house that no longer felt like mine, preparing breakfast for a woman I barely knew, while the texts kept pouring in, reminding me of my duty. And I started to wonder, what happens when the strong one breaks? Because I could feel it coming. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after she moved in passed like a slow fever, not intense enough to scream for help, but constant, exhausting, quietly dissolving the person I had built myself into. My home, once a sanctuary of stillness, had shifted. There were new sounds now, muffled sobs through the walls, footsteps at odd hours, the soft whir of a borrowed fan in the guest room. Her things began to spread across the apartment in subtle waves, a maternity pillow on the couch, prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter, her slippers beside my front door. I hadn't said yes, but somehow everything about my life was rearranging around her presence. The weight of it wasn't loud, it was quiet. That's what made it so hard to push back. There was no dramatic fight, no clear moment where I could shout enough. It was the kind of invasion that came dressed as need. And I had been trained since childhood not to question need. When I was 9, my mother sprained her back lifting a laundry basket. I remember because that was the week I stopped being a child. I started cooking dinner, canned soup and frozen peas, but it counted. I washed dishes I hadn't dirtied. I reminded my little brother to brush his teeth, and when my father came home, he called me his little helper with a proud smile. That praise felt like love, and I absorbed it like sunlight. I learned early that being useful earned affection. That saying, "I've got it," meant I was worthy. That my value came from fixing what others couldn't face. I didn't resent it then. It felt like purpose. But now, at 33, standing in my own kitchen making breakfast for someone else while her texts to my brother went unanswered, it felt like a prison. My sister-in-law never asked for much. But maybe that's what made it worse. She didn't demand anything outright. She just sank into the fabric of my life like she belonged. She took long naps during the day and left dishes in the sink overnight. She borrowed my blankets, my towels, even my body wash. Small things. Indefensible things. And yet, each one chipped away at the fragile edges of my peace. I told myself it was temporary, but I didn't believe it. Each morning, I'd go to work feeling like I was leaving my own house under watch. Each night, I'd return to find some new object out of place, her pregnancy book stacked on my coffee table, her doctor's appointment card stuck to my fridge. She never looked me in the eye for long. There was an awkward politeness between us, the kind that happens when both people know they're pretending. What haunted me wasn't just the situation. It was the silence from my family. No one checked in with me. No one asked if I was okay. The only messages I got were passive-aggressive affirmations that I was doing the right thing, as if I had chosen this, as if I had ever been given a choice. One afternoon, while cleaning out the hall closet, I found an old box from high school. Inside were photos, journals, ribbons from spelling bees I'd long forgotten. I found an entry I wrote at 16, the night my brother got suspended for fighting. I had written, "Everyone was upset, so I skipped my track meet to stay home and make dinner. No one said thank you. They were too busy yelling about him." Even back then, my sacrifices were invisible, and I kept making them, over and over again. That pattern became my identity. The good daughter, the strong one, the fallback plan. And now, once again, I had been placed on the altar of someone else's chaos, expected to hold it together while pretending I wasn't bleeding under the weight. The transformation of my home didn't happen in a single moment. It happened by inches. It crept in through open cupboards, unfolded laundry, and the slow replacement of my rhythms with someone else's. I began to notice the absence of my own habits. I no longer read in the living room at night. I no longer played music in the mornings. I stopped cooking real meals and started eating toast over the sink. My sister-in-law filled the spaces I used to claim as mine. Not maliciously, not loudly, just naturally. Her maternity clothes appeared on the back of my dining chairs. Her vitamins lined up beside my coffee mugs. Her presence extended like roots into every soft part of my routine. At first, I resisted only in small ways. I kept my bedroom door closed. I took longer showers, just to be alone. But those tiny defenses didn't hold. She'd knock to ask if I had extra towels. She'd knock to say the water was leaking under the sink. She'd knock to let me know her doctor moved her appointment and needed a ride. There was always a reason, always something small enough that I couldn't justify a real protest without looking cruel. And yet, I could feel myself disappearing under the weight of every yes I never got to choose. I started avoiding coming home right away after work. I'd sit in my car in the grocery store parking lot, watching people walk in and out like they had no idea how light they were. I envied their anonymity, their freedom, their ability to buy milk without wondering what new boundary had been crossed at home while they were gone. My mailbox started collecting sympathy cards addressed to her. Some from church friends. Some from people I didn't recognize. They talked about her strength and how blessed she was to have a safe place. They didn't mean me. I was just the backdrop. The couch that used to face the window now faced the TV because she liked to watch documentaries at night. The lamp in the corner had been moved because it flickered funny. My house no longer reflected me. It mirrored her needs. She rarely spoke unless she needed something. But her silence was heavy, filled with expectation and unspoken guilt. She walked with the slow ache of pregnancy, and everything about her presence screamed fragility. I didn't hate her, but I couldn't help the resentment building under my skin. It wasn't about her. It was about what I had allowed. Every night, I would lie awake listening to her breathing through the thin wall. Sometimes there were sobs, sometimes just the quiet rustle of blankets. And every time, I would feel the shame curl in my stomach, because I didn't want her there, because I didn't ask for this, because I was tired of carrying what wasn't mine. I kept thinking, maybe tomorrow I'll say something. Maybe I'll ask my brother to come get her. Maybe I'll tell my mother this isn't working. But every time I picked up the phone, my chest tightened, and I'd put it down again. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I cleaned. Compulsively. Obsessively. I scrubbed the baseboards at midnight. I reorganized my spice rack. I cleaned the grout in the bathroom with a toothbrush. I poured every unspoken frustration into surfaces, hoping that if I made the house spotless enough, I'd somehow reclaim a piece of myself. But the more I cleaned, the more I felt buried. I started forgetting things. Simple things, my keys, my lunch, bills I normally paid ahead of time. My mind felt fogged, like I was walking through a version of my life that was just slightly misaligned. I knew where I was, but I no longer felt like I belonged. One evening, I came home to find my office door open. She had moved in a desk someone dropped off for her, pushed my reading chair into the hallway, and started setting up her laptop. No warning, no ask, just done. I stood in the hallway, staring at the displaced chair, and felt a numb kind of ache rise in my throat. I didn't say anything. I just turned away and went to the kitchen, the one room she hadn't taken over yet. But I knew then, this wasn't temporary. This wasn't emergency shelter. This was a quiet, unspoken occupation. And the worst part? Everyone expected me to be grateful for it. I thought back to the last time I cried in front of someone. It had been years, maybe a decade. I had always prided myself on being calm, composed, the person others could lean on. But that image, that identity I'd worked so hard to maintain, was starting to fracture. And the cracks weren't just internal anymore. They were leaking into my routines, my health, my sanity. And still, I said nothing. Because what do you say when you've spent your whole life being the reliable one? When your silence has been rewarded and your needs dismissed so many times you forget they even matter. That night, I stood in the middle of my living room, hers now, mostly, and looked around. I didn't recognize it. Not the space, not the air, not myself. And deep down, I knew something was coming. Not because I was ready to fight, but because I had finally admitted to myself that I couldn't survive like this much longer. There are certain moments that don't feel like moments at all. They feel like unravelings, quiet collapses dressed in ordinary clothes. You don't know they're happening until something inside you slips, and you're no longer who you were the day before. That moment came for me on a Sunday afternoon. The weather was cold and gray, the kind of Portland day that usually made me grateful for blankets and books. But there was no stillness in my home anymore. Only noise. The subtle, inescapable noise of someone else's life spilling into mine. I had barely slept. My body ached from stress. My skin felt too tight. When I got out of bed, I stepped on a baby bottle cap in the hallway. Her hallway now, too. I bent down to pick it up and felt my spine lock. Not from pain, from something deeper, something I couldn't name yet. The rest of the morning blurred. I cleaned. Again. I folded towels that weren't mine. I took out trash that wasn't mine. I reheated leftovers for someone who never said thank you. Every task stacked on top of the last until I didn't know if I was functioning or just surviving. Then I saw it. A folded invitation on the counter. Light pink cardstock with silver lettering. A baby shower. In my home. Organized by her friends. Sent from her email. There it was in print. My address. My name omitted entirely. A list of guests. Decorations. Gift registry links. A full event planned without a word to me. I didn't feel rage. Not at first. Just a slow rising heat that started in my chest and spread outward like ink in water. I stood there staring at it, my hands trembling slightly. The room tilted, my breath shortened. It wasn't the party. It wasn't the guests. It was the assumption, the absolute, unquestioned certainty that I would accommodate, absorb, disappear into the background, just like always. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door behind me, even though no one had ever tried to come in without knocking. I sat on the floor, cold tile pressing into my legs, and stared at the grout lines like they could give me answers. And then it came, the sob I didn't expect. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't cinematic, it was raw and ugly and heaving. I pressed a towel into my mouth to muffle the sound, even though she probably couldn't hear it. But it wasn't about her. It was about me. It was about the version of me that had been dying a slow, invisible death for years. The version that said yes because she didn't know she was allowed to say no. The version who mistook silence for strength and endurance for love. I cried until my skin felt drained of heat. Until I couldn't remember what had triggered it. Until I was just a woman on a bathroom floor, finally seeing the wreckage she'd tried to tidy into order. When the sobs subsided, I didn't move. I just breathed. And in that silence, I felt it. The shift. Not a lightning bolt. Not a revelation. Just a quiet realization. I couldn't go back. Not to who I had been. Not to how things had always been. This wasn't about my sister-in-law anymore, or my brother, or even my mother's endless guilt-laced expectations. It was about the cage I had helped them build around me, and the key I'd refused to use, even though it had always been in my hand. I stood up, washed my face, looked in the mirror. I didn't look different, but I didn't look the same either. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't clean. I didn't tiptoe. I went into my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed with the lights off. I didn't need light. I just needed quiet. Not the kind that's filled with expectation, the kind that comes from choosing yourself, deliberately, even once. It was a small act, but it was the beginning of my return. But something had shifted. Not on the outside, not yet. I still kept the kitchen clean. I still let her take the bigger portion of dinner. I still offered rides to her appointments when she needed them. But inside, a quiet resistance was forming. Not rebellion, just awareness. A steady realization that none of this was love. That obligation and care are not the same thing. And that being needed is not the same as being respected. Every night, I lay in bed and asked myself the same question. How did I end up here? And why was I always the one expected to fix what other people broke? My childhood had taught me to be the reliable one. My family had rewarded my silence and punished my boundaries. And so, at 33, I was still playing the same role I had learned at 9, just in a different costume. But I was beginning to realize that being the strong one wasn't strength at all. It was fear. Fear of being unloved if I said no. Fear of being cast as selfish for wanting peace. Fear of becoming the villain in someone else's story if I dared to write my own. That fear had kept me quiet. Until now. Because in the quiet corners of my day, in the bathroom mirror, in the stillness before sleep, I had started to feel something else. A flicker, a fracture. A voice I hadn't heard in years, whispering that I deserved better than to be a placeholder in my own life. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was awake. And that, I would come to learn, was the beginning of everything. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't arrive with yelling or slamming doors. It creeps in through open trust and unanswered questions, and by the time you notice it, it's already woven into your days. It doesn't scream. It sighs. It pretends to care. And it always comes wearing the face of someone you once loved. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't been snooping. That's what I told myself at first. I had gone into the guest room to change the sheets. She had gone out for a walk, said she needed fresh air. And something in me, it wasn't suspicion exactly, just restlessness, like a pull in my chest telling me to stop ignoring what I already knew. Her bag was partially unzipped, clothes spilling out in soft folds, but it was the phone charger on the bed that caught my eye. Not mine, not hers either. A spare one I recognized. My brother had left it in my car months ago. I picked it up, stared at it, and that's when I saw her notebook. It was pink and floral, the kind sold at pharmacies or gas stations, tucked just beneath a folded maternity brochure. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe because I already knew I wouldn't like what I saw. The first few pages were harmless. Lists, appointment dates, baby names. But a few pages in, I saw a familiar handwriting that wasn't hers. Messier, rushed, my brother's, a list, bullet points. It started with Claire's place, most stable option. Then, talk to mom first. And then, underlined twice, don't ask, she'll say no, just do it. I stopped breathing. There it was, in ink, proof that this hadn't been a spontaneous decision. It wasn't a desperate act made in crisis. It was a coordinated move, one I was never supposed to see, one I was never supposed to question. My stomach tightened. The air in the room shifted. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared down at the words like they were written in fire. My mind began to replay every moment since the day she arrived, every unanswered call, every text from my mother cloaked in virtue, every silence that had swallowed my confusion whole. They knew. They knew I wouldn't agree. They knew I'd say no if given the chance. so they didn't give me one. They had taken my compliance for granted. My silence. My pattern of stepping in, smoothing over, making space where there was none. They had used everything they knew about me, every strength, every weakness, as leverage to orchestrate my undoing. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, a cold clarity settled into my chest, a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. It didn't hurt less, knowing the truth. But it gave my pain structure, purpose, something to rise against. I put the notebook back where I found it, not out of kindness, but strategy. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to demand apologies or scream into the void. Number that would only feed the narrative they had already written for me. The over-emotional, ungrateful sister. The one who made things harder than they needed to be. Number I would not play that role. Instead, I started documenting. I took photos of the notebook pages. I printed my text history with my family. I began saving voice memos, not because I planned to use them, at least not yet, but because I needed to feel like I had a grip on something. Control, even in fragments. I changed the password to my Wi-Fi. I updated my smart lock settings. I removed my emergency key from under the flower pot, the one my mother had insisted I always leave, just in case. I wasn't paranoid. I was awake. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer reacting. I was observing, planning, rebuilding the broken lines between what belonged to me and what had been taken. And in the quiet spaces between those steps, I started remembering other betrayals. Smaller ones, older ones. The times my mother had shared my secrets with aunts at family gatherings. The time my brother crashed my car and told my parents it was my fault. The time I didn't speak up and was rewarded with silence and cold dinners for a week. This hadn't started now. This was just the loudest echo of a pattern that had been forming for years. One I had mistaken for love, for duty, for family. That night, I didn't speak to her when she returned. I smiled, nodded. I made myself tea and watched a documentary I had seen before just to feel something familiar. She talked about the baby moving more lately. I nodded again. I let her talk. But I had already moved beyond that moment. I wasn't just hosting her anymore. I was preparing to take my life back. And something in me, something deep, quiet, and powerful, had decided that silence was no longer safety. It was surrender. And I was done surrendering. I had always imagined confrontations as loud things, explosions, tears, raised voices, people storming out of rooms and slamming doors behind them. But when the time finally came, mine wasn't like that. It was quiet, measured, the kind of silence you hear right before a storm. Not chaos, but control. The week after I found the notebook, I moved through the house like a shadow. I kept the routines she expected of me, meals, small talk, offers of help, but inside, something had gone still, cold, not cruel, but clear. I was done pretending this was acceptable. I was done waiting for someone else to fix what had been forced onto me. I chose a Sunday afternoon. It felt right, somehow. A symbolic day, soaked in family tradition. A day when we were supposed to gather in peace, when memories were made, when forgiveness was passed around like mashed potatoes. That made it perfect. I wasn't looking for a scene. I was looking for a line. I invited them, my parents, my brother. I made sure she would be gone. She had a prenatal class that day. The moment felt delicate, but also deliberate. I needed them to be in my space, face to face, where nothing could be softened through a screen or misread in a text. I cleaned the house that morning, not out of habit, but intention. I wanted it to feel neutral, not warm, not hostile, just uncomfortably spotless. I laid out tea, as if it were any other visit, but I placed my printed documents beside my mug, a quiet statement waiting to be read. When they arrived, I didn't greet them with hugs. I stood in the doorway and let them pass. My mother looked around and commented on how cozy everything was. My father seemed tense, unsure of what this was. My brother barely met my eyes. We sat in the living room. I didn't sit on the couch. I took the armchair. That mattered, somehow. The space between us was deliberate. I didn't offer tea. I didn't offer comfort. I offered truth. I picked up the documents, my evidence, my small pile of undeniable reality. Screenshots, photos, a printed calendar showing the timeline of when I'd been excluded from decisions. Notes from the notebook I hadn't mentioned I had read. The list my brother wrote, the one that reduced my home to a convenience. I placed them on the table. No words, just the sound of paper against wood. Then I sat back. For the first time in years, I watched them squirm while I stayed still. My mother reached for the papers with fingers that trembled slightly. My brother didn't touch them. He stared at the floor. I let the silence work for me. Let them fill it with discomfort. Let them carry the weight of what they had done. Something I had carried alone for weeks, for years, in different forms. And still, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask them to explain themselves, because there was nothing they could say that would make it better. And for once, I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for recognition. I was looking to reclaim the voice they had been muting since childhood. When my mother finally looked at me, her expression was tight, defensive. Her eyes searched mine for softness, the usual crack in my boundary where she could slip inside and take control of the narrative. But I had sealed it shut. I told them, plainly, evenly, what had happened, what they had done, how they had coordinated my silence. I spoke like someone reading from a weather report, dry, factual, precise. I didn't perform pain. I didn't give them tears to comfort or guilt to manipulate. I gave them facts. I reminded them of every time I'd been used as a buffer. Every time my peace had been offered up without consent. Every time my willingness to endure had been mistaken for consent. And then I said something I hadn't ever said to them before, not even in my head. I told them I was done, not as a threat, not as punishment, just done. I wouldn't be hosting anyone else. I wouldn't be absorbing responsibility that wasn't mine. I wouldn't be stepping into roles they hadn't earned the right to assign me. And most of all, I would no longer tolerate being cast as the villain simply for choosing myself. They didn't say much. My mother opened her mouth once, but I raised my hand gently, just enough to let her know I was still speaking. She closed it. My father looked away. My brother finally met my eyes, but he didn't apologize. Not with words, not with posture. He just looked at me like I had changed into someone he no longer recognized. And maybe I had. Because I wasn't asking for anything anymore. I wasn't asking them to understand. I wasn't asking them to agree. I wasn't even asking them to leave. I was simply stating what would and would not happen going forward. That was the difference. When they left, no one hugged me. The door clicked shut behind them, and I stood in the stillness for a long time. My legs trembled, not from fear but release. The kind that comes after carrying something too long, too far, too quietly. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt real, present, like my body finally belonged to me again. That night, I sat on the couch, my couch, and watched the sky darken outside my window. The house felt different, lighter, not because they were gone, but because I was no longer pretending. I wasn't just recovering my home. I was recovering myself. The air was different after they left. Not cleaner, not calmer, just unfamiliar. Like a room that had been rearranged in the dark. I could still feel their presence lingering in the corners of the house, but I didn't feel haunted. I felt emptied. Not in a hollow way, but in the way a room feels after boxes are carried out, the possibility of space returning. She came back that evening, just after sunset. Her steps were slower than usual, her hands pressed gently to her belly like she was holding more than just weight. I watched her move through the door, into the home we both knew no longer belonged to her. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She sensed it. The shift. It hung between us, quiet and irreversible. The next few days passed like the final chapters of a book I no longer wanted to read. She was still there, but everything was different. I stopped cooking for two. I stopped offering. I didn't refuse her presence. I just stopped accommodating it. The emotional leash had been cut. I thought maybe she would leave. Maybe she'd call my brother. Maybe she'd pack her things. But she didn't. She stayed. Unspoken, unmoved, a ghost of the woman who had taken up space in my world without asking. But even ghosts know when their haunting has lost its grip. On the fourth morning, it happened. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, when I heard a soft thud. Not loud, not panicked, just the unmistakable sound of something falling that shouldn't. My body responded before my mind did. I ran to the hallway and found her leaning against the wall, hands gripping her belly, face pale with pain. There was a dampness spreading across the floor beneath her. Labor, the moment I had both anticipated and dreaded. I froze for half a second, not from fear, but choice. I knew this was the moment I'd always assumed would trap me again, force me back into service. But instead, I felt calm, detached, not uncaring, just clear. The decision I made next would be mine, not inherited, not demanded, mine. I grabbed her hospital bag, already packed near the front door, helped her into the car, drove in silence. The city passed by in slow motion. Her breath was shallow, her hands clenched the sides of the seat. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't panic. I didn't reassure her. I just drove. At the hospital, I did what needed to be done. I signed her in. I helped her through intake. I stayed until they wheeled her into delivery, then stepped back. I didn't follow. I didn't offer to hold her hand. I sat in the waiting room, hands folded in my lap, staring at the wall like it might hold a door to another life. Hours passed. I didn't call anyone, not my brother, not my mother. I knew they'd find out. One way or another, they'd come. But this moment didn't belong to them. It didn't even belong to her. It belonged to me, because I had chosen it, freely, for once. Just before sunrise, a nurse walked out and gave me the news. The baby had arrived, healthy, safe, a boy. I nodded, thanked her, but I didn't go in. I walked outside instead. The parking lot was still wet from early rain, the asphalt gleaming under the streetlights. The sky was a soft gray, waiting for dawn. I stood there for a long time, breathing air that tasted like distance, like closure. I knew then that this was the last thing I would do for them. Not because I was cold, not because I was angry, but because I was done. When I got home, the house felt hollow. Her things were still there, a cup on the table, a sweater draped over the couch, but the energy was gone, the grip, the hold. I gathered her belongings slowly, carefully, folding everything with a quiet reverence, not for her, but for myself, for the ritual of reclaiming space. I packed everything into the guest room, closed the door, stood in the hallway for a long time. Then I went to my room, opened the window, let the air shift. Later that day, my brother called. I saw his name flash on the screen. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear what excuses he'd shaped into concern. I wasn't ready to pretend we still spoke the same language. Maybe one day I would be, but not yet. That night, I slept without interruption for the first time in months. No creaking floors, no pacing footsteps, no silent resentment clawing at the back of my mind. Just breathe, just stillness, just mine. There's a strange quiet that follows emotional earthquakes. It's not peace, not at first. It's more like the stillness of a room where something heavy has finally stopped vibrating. I woke into that silence the morning after the birth. My body felt foreign, light but not rested, empty but not lost, just unfamiliar, like it had been hollowed out and was waiting to be filled with something new. Her room was untouched. The door stayed closed. I didn't call. I didn't visit the hospital. I didn't text to ask how she was doing or if she needed anything. I didn't bring flowers or send congratulations. I had fulfilled the last obligation that belonged to someone else. The rest of me, what was left, belonged to me. That week, I changed the locks on my doors, not out of spite, out of protection. There was no warning, no announcement, just a quiet decision made with calm certainty. I watched the locksmith work while sipping tea, as if I were overseeing the installation of something sacred. And I suppose I was. Boundaries, reinforced, not just physical ones, but emotional, symbolic. I started therapy the following week. I hadn't planned to. I had never really believed I needed it. I thought understanding your pain was enough to live through it. But I realized quickly that naming the wound isn't the same as healing it. Knowing why I broke didn't stitch me back together. I needed something more. Someone to help me look at the map of my life and redraw the lines. The therapist was soft-spoken, patient. She didn't rush me. She didn't ask me to explain everything in one session. Instead, she asked one question that unraveled me more than any accusation ever had. When was the first time you learned your needs didn't matter? I didn't have an answer, but I could feel it, that invisible thread running through every chapter of my life. From childhood to now, every time I stayed quiet, every time I made myself smaller to fit someone else's need, every time I said yes with a tight throat and a fake smile. And now, for the first time, I was cutting that thread, piece by piece, word by word. I started going through my house like an archaeologist, pulling up remnants of who I used to be. I threw out mugs I hated but kept for guests, clothes I wore to look appropriate, decorations my mother gave me that never felt like mine. I donated half my books, rearranged every room, bought bedding I actually liked instead of the one that had always been practical. I repainted the spare room, not because I needed to erase her, but because I needed to reclaim the walls. My space had been occupied for too long. Now it needed to speak only to me. Some relatives began to reach out, quietly, carefully. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me late at night, said she'd heard what happened, said she admired my strength. An aunt sent a card with no return address. Inside was a simple sentence: I wish I'd done what you're doing now. Not everyone understood. Some tried to guilt me, subtle, lingering comments about what family means or how we show up for each other. But I didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of clarity, because now I understood the difference between support and sacrifice, between care and control. My mother tried twice to call. I didn't answer. I let the silence answer for me. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It was that I finally loved myself enough to stop handing her the scissors she used to cut pieces off me. My brother sent one message, a short one. No apology, just a vague question about how things were going. I stared at the screen for a while, then deleted it without responding. I wasn't ready to forgive. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a requirement for healing. It was an option, a choice. And sometimes, peace came from letting go without reconciling, from no longer needing closure from the people who broke you. One day, I was standing in the kitchen when sunlight hit the counter just right. The air smelled like oranges and clean linen. Music played faintly from the speaker. My music, not background noise for someone else. And for the first time in what felt like years, I breathed all the way in. I wasn't healed, but I wasn't lost either. I was becoming. Not louder, not harder. Just honest. With myself. With what I needed. With what I would and would not allow. The version of me that had held everyone else together was still there. Tired, bruised, tender. But she wasn't in charge anymore. She had done her job. She had survived long enough for someone stronger to arrive. Not in spite of her, but because of her. Now it was my turn to live. On my terms. Without guilt. Without apology. Without waiting for anyone to say I had earned it. Because being alive doesn't require permission. And finally, I had stopped asking. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or clarity. It shows up slowly, often in disguise. In a breath that doesn't catch. In the moment you realize you didn't flinch when your phone rang. In the quiet sense that your house feels like a home again. Not because someone left, but because you returned to it. I didn't wake up one morning fully restored. There was no definitive day where I knew I was whole. It happened in pieces. Soft, stubborn pieces. Like puzzle fragments scattered across my life, finally allowed to find their place. Therapy became more than just an appointment. It became a mirror. Some days I walked in feeling heavy, expecting to bleed out the truth and leave lighter. Other days I said almost nothing. Just sat there tracing the grain in the wooden arms of the chair and let the silence stretch. But every session became a brick. One more stone in the foundation I was laying beneath myself. Something stable. Something that didn't shake every time someone else made a mess. I started journaling again, not to document pain but to witness growth. The first few entries were clumsy, rambling, guarded. I wrote like I was still afraid someone would read it and judge me, but over time, the pages softened. I stopped editing myself, stopped apologizing on paper. I wrote things I'd never said out loud. Things like, I don't want to be needed anymore, and I want joy that doesn't come with a cost. Those sentences terrified me because they felt selfish, and for most of my life, selfishness had been painted as the ultimate sin. But I was beginning to understand that wanting a life that fits you isn't selfish. It's sacred. My routines changed. I started walking in the mornings, headphones in, playlists full of music that made me feel weightless. I found a trail near the edge of town where no one recognized me. No expectations, just trees, breath, and pavement. It became my place to remember who I was before I was buried under obligation. I signed up for a pottery class. Not because I needed a hobby, but because I needed to make something with my hands that didn't involve survival. The first bowl I made collapsed in the kiln. I laughed, not bitterly, genuinely. It felt good to fail at something that didn't matter, to create for the sake of creating. I started cooking again, not out of duty, but for pleasure. I experimented with flavors I'd always been curious about but never prioritized. I bought herbs I couldn't pronounce. I ate dinner in the living room with candles lit and music playing. For no one. Just me. There was a time when being alone in that house had felt like exile. But now, it felt like permission. Space to breathe without monitoring. Silence without expectation. I began to realize how much noise I had grown used to, how I'd accepted chaos as normal simply because I'd never experienced anything else. Rebuilding wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I took down the spare bed and turned the guest room into a creative space. Not an office, not a storage closet. A room with an easel, a low shelf of books, A beanbag chair I bought on impulse. I painted the walls a soft blue. No one approved the color. No one told me it clashed. And for once, I didn't ask. I went through old photos. At first, it hurt. Seeing my younger self smiling beside people who had taught me that love was something you earned through service. But the more I looked, the more I began to see something else. The flickers of a girl who had always wanted more, not things, not status, just space, autonomy, air. One afternoon, I found a childhood drawing folded between pages of an old journal. It was a house, colorful, chaotic. But what caught my breath was what I'd written on the bottom in crayon. My home, my rules. I sat with that for a long time. That version of me, the one who dared to imagine ownership, boundaries, freedom, she hadn't died. She'd just been buried under layers of expectation, and now I was unearthing her, carefully, gratefully. I started making amends, but not the kind that come with apologies, the kind that come with changed behavior. I reached out to people I'd pulled away from, not to explain, but to reconnect. I met a college friend for coffee. We talked for hours, not once about family or responsibility, just life, article travel, things I had forgotten I cared about. I also let go of relationships that no longer fit, quietly, gently. I stopped returning calls that made my stomach tighten. I muted conversations that only brought guilt. It wasn't personal, it was necessary. Not everything has to be broken loudly to be ended well. Some days were still hard. I had moments of doubt, of grief, of wondering if I'd made too much out of things, if maybe I had overreacted. But those thoughts didn't stay long. They came like ghosts and left like breath, because I had built a new truth too solid to be haunted for long. Healing made me braver, not louder. I didn't become someone who screamed her worth. I became someone who no longer whispered it. I didn't need everyone to understand me. I just needed to understand myself. And finally, I did. I was no longer the fallback plan, no longer the backup parent, no longer the one who answered the phone at midnight or rearranged her life to catch someone else's mess. I was just Claire. Not someone's strong sister, not someone's good daughter, not someone's temporary solution. Just Claire. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. There is a moment in healing when everything you endured stops being a wound and starts becoming a story. Not a scar to hide, but a lesson carried forward, folded into who you are now. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't excuse it, but it reclaims it. I felt that shift one morning in early spring. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, legs tucked under me, watching the light rise over the tops of trees that had once felt like walls. Now they looked like guardians. There was a softness in the air. Not just the weather, but me. I was softer and stronger, like something newly made. I had spent months rebuilding, not just my space, not just my routines, but my voice. Not the voice people heard when I spoke out loud, but the inner one. The voice I had silenced for years in order to be agreeable, helpful, likable. That voice had grown louder, clearer, and I had started to trust it again. I was no longer filling my time just to feel valuable. I had learned to sit with quiet and know it didn't mean I was forgotten. I had learned to rest without guilt, to enjoy peace without apology. I was still in therapy, still writing, still walking the trail that wound through the edge of town. But now, I noticed the color of the leaves again. I noticed the way the air changed at dusk. I noticed myself, not as an afterthought, but as the center of my own life. One day, I opened my phone and looked at the old group chat with my family. I hadn't opened it in weeks. The messages had long stopped. I scrolled through them, not with bitterness, but with distance. I could see it now, how they had used love like a leash, how I had let them, and how I had finally unclipped it. I didn't reply to any of the old texts. I didn't send a new one. I simply archived the thread. It was no longer a room I needed to stand in. I wasn't angry. I was free. The baby was born healthy. I knew that from a mutual acquaintance. He had his father's eyes, she said, and a surprisingly loud laugh. I didn't ask to see pictures. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't owe them anything. Not silence, not presence, not caretaking. I had given enough. I had spent years being the strong one. But strength, I learned, isn't about endurance. It's about honesty. It's about knowing your limit and honoring it before someone else breaks you. It's about saying no, not as rebellion, but as protection. I started talking about what happened, not in anger, not to shame anyone, but because telling the truth felt like planting seeds. I shared parts of it with friends, with women in support groups, with strangers online. And what came back to me over and over again was this: I thought I was the only one. We aren't. There are so many of us who were raised to believe love is earned by sacrifice. That peace is keeping quiet. That family means carrying everyone's weight but your own. And for so long, I thought that was normal. But I know better now. And that knowing has changed everything. I started volunteering at a women's center, speaking with people who were learning to say no for the first time in their lives. Their stories were different from mine, but the rhythm was the same: rescue, silence, resentment, awakening. I saw pieces of myself in each of them, and I realized something powerful. Pain shared is not pain doubled. Pain shared is power spread. And the more I gave my voice to others, the more it echoed back into my own bones, stronger, steadier, unmistakably mine. I kept my boundaries, not out of punishment, but because they were sacred. When my mother finally sent a letter, I read it once. It was filled with apologies shaped like explanations, and I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, but because I needed her absence more than her guilt. My brother sent nothing. That, somehow, hurt less. I accepted that closure wasn't always a conversation. Sometimes it was simply the decision to stop waiting. In the months that followed, I found joy in small things again. I painted the hallway a deep emerald green. I traveled solo for the first time. I bought a ridiculous wide-brimmed hat and wore it with sunglasses in cafes where no one knew my name. I danced in my kitchen to old soul records while pasta boiled on the stove. I laughed louder. I said no faster. I let things go sooner, and I kept writing. Eventually, I wrote the whole story. This story. I didn't write it to shame anyone. I wrote it because someone needs to hear it. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe you've been the strong one in your family. Maybe you've been praised for your silence, for your reliability, for always picking up the pieces. Maybe you've been told that boundaries are betrayal, that self-respect is selfish, that saying no means you've failed someone. If you have, then I want you to know what I finally learned. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to choose peace over obligation. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to protect your spirit. You are allowed to walk away, even from the people who raised you. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Some end in freedom, and that's a victory too. If this story reached you, if even one sentence rang true inside you, then I hope you'll do what I did when I was ready to reclaim my life. Say it out loud, write it down, draw a line, and don't look back, because you are not here to be someone else's solution. You are here to become fully, unapologetically you. And if you've made it this far with me, thank you. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support this channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. I truly believe that when we speak our truth, we invite miracles. So if you subscribe, I hope you find the same kind of luck I did, the kind you create for yourself. Until next time, wherever you are, be gentle with yourself, and remember, You don't need permission to be free.